Reste-t-il de nos amours? Que reste-t-il de ces beaux jours? Une photo, vieille photo.
He was born in 1932 in the Pigalle area. The real life was in Pigalle, you know, very mixed by entertainment, coffees, restaurants, prostitutes, workers, petits bourgeois, and so on. So he was his area. And he was very free because his parents doesn't take care of him, you know. And he went to school, but he was a very bad boy in the school. He left every time to go to see movies, you know, with his friend Robert Lachenay. I think his dream was to be close to the Tour Eiffel, because when he was young, when he discovered Tour Eiffel, it was a trip for him, a journey, you know. He left this place to go to see the Paris, the big Paris, you know.
I think Truffaut searched for an ideal form of filmmaking, which is for most of us a total dream, and it's quite unattainable, I'm afraid.
He made his first film about himself. A lot of directors do that, but nobody's done it quite so successfully as in 400 Blows.
Je mens de temps en temps, quoi. Des fois, je leur dirais des choses qui seraient la vérité, ils me croiraient pas, alors je préfère dire des mensonges.
Pourquoi n'aimes-tu pas ta mère?
Parce que d'abord, j'étais en nourrice, puis quand ils ont plus eu d'argent, ils m'ont mis chez ma grand-mère.
He himself had a terrible childhood. He was farmed out to his grandparents by his parents, and they didn't look after him very well. He took all sorts of different jobs. He finally went into the army and then misbehaved there.
He was a kind of lost boy when he was found by André Bazin.
Only Bazin saved him. Really, if Bazin hadn't said, "Come and write for us," I don't know what would have been the fate of Truffaut. He'd probably never made a film.
Actually, and helped him to build himself as a adult and a human being. Cahiers du Cinéma was created in 1951. What made it quite immediately so alive and so remarkable was around André Bazin, a group of very young film critics, among whom Francois Truffaut.
The first article, a very important article he wrote for Cahiers du Cinéma in 1953, he was 22 years old, so he was a very young guy, passionate by cinema.
André Bazin not only gave them jobs, he didn't actually pay them much for the work they did, but they were certainly began to be noticed. And he would sit watching films with them. Very often he had diametrically opposed views to them because he was more conventional as a critic, although he was a great innovator in his own way. But they'd watch, they'd discuss, and then they'd write.
He spent 1 year with Roberto Rossellini in Italy, in France, in Spain, trying to make a film with Rossellini. He wanted to be inside the cinema.
With the Cahiers du Cinéma, he kind of bonded with people of his generation, and they formed this sort of crazy family that was fond of films and fond of the idea of making films in a different fashion.
What they wanted, and they included Godard and Truffaut and Romer and Chabrol, what they actually wanted was to stop being critics and to start making films. And the Nouvelle Vague was really their attempt to make a personal film before they reached the age of 35, which they all managed to do.
Apart from what they were about, simply in their way of storytelling and the way of and their healthy subversive anarchy, were a great influence on one's thinking as a filmmaker as well as personally.
He married a girl who was also a filmmaker, and being a hoodlum, he actually attacked her films while he was married to her. And the father, who was a producer, said, well, if you think you can do so well, why did you make a film then? And actually gave him some money to make a film.
Very conventional, and Truffaut came and he said, there are no more rules, we can do whatever we want.
He decided he'd make a film about his own life, and he chose Jean-Pierre Léaud because Léaud seemed to be rather like him.
Pressé? Mais pourquoi? Petite feuille a dit qu'il ne laisserait pas rentrer. Tu crois que le ferait? Sûr, peut pas de piffer. Avez-vous mené? Ouais, je sors le cantine. Alors fais-moi confiance, par ici la sortie. Qu'est-ce qu'on va foutre maintenant?
One of the great things is him finding Jean-Pierre Léaud. I mean, in a way, that's one of the greatest partnerships in cinema.
Oh la vache! Un cheval! Il est à mon père, c'est un souvenir. Oh, c'est méchamment grand chez toi. Tiens, aide-moi à débarrasser le divan. Tu dormiras là, incognito. Mais tes parents? Ils ne viennent jamais ici. Ma mère picole et mon père passe son temps en course.
Here was this remarkable, virtually autobiographical film in which Léaud actually became Truffaut.
Ouais, c'était toi, un petit salaud, qui m'a fait poirer tout à l'heure. Salaud, Morissette! Dégueulasse! Les jours sont comptés, Morissette! Ça t'est arrivé du monde, Morissette!
To me, he's like a child playing at making movies, and that's, I think, ties in a lot with his life story and how, you know, perhaps his childhood was an incredibly unhappy one.
They're wonderful portraits of Paris. I mean, Truffaut films are wonderful for that. He was one of the first directors, I think, with Becker, perhaps in Melville, to make high-angle shots of people in the streets in Paris. That was wonderful.
At the time, Paris was very black, you know. All the wall of the building was black, you know. Paris changed when André Malraux, cultural minister of General de Gaulle, decided to restore all the buildings of Paris, and Paris became a modern city.
Suddenly you get the feeling of the city and its architectural, you know, strangeness as well. And he was really one of the first, you know, filmmakers to show Paris in this very particular romantic way.
I met him 2 times by a year. We have a lunch, and the only thing we spoke was cinema, you know, nothing else, cinema. I went many times at the film Du Carrosse, even when he was living there and working there. Everything was classified and so on. He was obsessed by the archives, you know, of his own life. But also he had some dossier on Godard, Rivette, dossier Romer, dossier Ophuls, dossier Chaplin.
He's a rebel with a cause. That's the definition of Truffaut. And like every rebel with a cause, he's smart enough not to go against the system. He thinks the best way to go against the system is to work within the system and kind of sabotage the system. So this is why he created his own production tool. And this is why he tried to be very, very well exposed on the international festival scene. he used that power of an established filmmaker to really work against all the cliches and the conventions of filmmaking in France.
Truffaut actually won a prize at Cannes, having been banned because he was slagged off so many French movies in the newspapers. And then the following year they said, all right, you can come. And then he won because he'd made 400 coups.
Les 400 coups, the first movie he did was in Cannes. And I can identify to that movie because it's about a little boy who's trying to find, a young man who's trying to find his own path. So for me, it was as a 16 or 17 years old, that's when I started to want to do movies. It was great because it talked to me. It says, yeah, you can be your own man.
There was something organic and spontaneous about and life-affirming about the Nouvelle Vague, which was a huge influence on many people, not least me.
That's one of the things I learned from Truffaut, is never lose touch with what initiated your love for film. So he was trying to fit and not fit in. He was trying to do both at the same time, to fit in order to speak his own voice. He loved to go and see a comedy or an action film. There was, no hierarchy in how he could be fed by film, and we should come back to this.
He's like a sort of a champion for the non-intellectuals, for the people who just want to just make things up and delight people and not get too bogged down in just the endless analysis. He managed to do the analysis as a journalist, but he still did that in a kind of in a joyful, kind of like childlike, enthusiastic way.
And when he made in 1962 the so important interview with Hitchcock in Universal Studio in Los Angeles,
I found myself editing the radio program Hitchcock Truffaut, and Truffaut was a wonderful interviewer. And he had a way of sharing his love for Hitchcock and how film is made that was fascinating.
What he projects from his characters on is so individual and is so unique, and how communication is so hard, but he believes in communication.
There was also this kind of fatherhood, older brother and younger brother relation between Truffaut and Leo.
Discovering him, in a way, made his career.
You couldn't say that Truffaut was heavily apparent in the other Antoine Doinel films as he was in 400 Blows. Leo took over the part, rather, and, he became a huge star of the French cinema without ever being a sexy star. He was someone who was shy, rather charming, rather hesitant, unable to cope with life, and certainly unable to cope with women. And you couldn't really say that of Truffaut.
The films I was brought up with were male-oriented, they were macho-oriented, and the female characters were not that important. And then when I looked and read Truffaut's critics, I realized the importance of the female characters in the Howard Hawks films and the Hitchcock films. So I looked at women in films differently. And then when I looked at his movies, I saw how he even went further than Hitchcock or Hawks, and giving the actresses and the female characters a very genuine importance.
Bonjour Antoine.
Bonjour madame. Faut que je donne les livres comptables à Antoine.
Vous avez déjeuné?
Enfin oui, déjà, on va...
Ah oui, avec Actif?
Non, il m'en manque un. Voici-vous. Je vous le donnerai tout à l'heure. Merci beaucoup.
Truffaut wanted to be in cinema, to make films, to have a relation with actress. He was passionate by the actress. He was in love with all his actress because he wanted to be, just to live, making films, only this. He didn't like the real life because it's not interesting. He was not a tourist. He was not, he doesn't want to have a good lunch or a good dinner. He preferred to go to cinema or to theater to discover young actors or actresses. All his life was totally obsessed by the idea of making movies and to be independent.
François Truffaut retrouve Gérard Depardieu pour La femme d'à côté, avec pour la première fois au cinéma Fanny Ardant.
He can do very simple setups in very simple situations, and he managed from these situation setups to create an atmosphere and a sense of also dread almost and suspense with very little details.
Alors, qu'est-ce qu'elle vient faire ici, cette femme-là?
J'ai pas fait exprès de venir habiter en face de chez toi.
Mais écoute, tu aurais pu me prévenir.
Je ne veux plus te voir. Tu me fais peur.
Each film speaks about the death, the love, but the failure of the love.
Ni avec toi, ni sans toi.
Est-ce que tu m'aimes? Est-ce que tu me protégeras toujours?
I really like Soft Skin. I like Soft Skin because it's a very, very sad and dark little story.
Oh. Je suis désolée, excusez-moi. Merci, monsieur. Pardon.
It's a gripping film. I mean, you really want to know how it's going to end. But at the same time, it's a very honest and true film to how love can be terrible. You know, our love affair can happen to be a terrible, terrible business.
Allez, va danser, toi. Je t'assure, ça m'ennuie pas du tout.
Mais qu'est-ce que tu vas faire?
Comment est-ce que je vais faire? Mais je vais te regarder. Ce sera mon plaisir.
It's a very dark little tale about a middle-aged man who cheats on his wife. And it could be really lame and uninteresting. And what he makes of that is a sort of small-scale tragedy. But this man decides to abandon, in order to get this woman in his life. Becomes a disaster. So it's and it's wonderfully made because it's really made into it's like looking at 3 films in one.
Each film must be like the print of your soul, your heart.
C'est elle?
Ouais, c'est elle. Elle est belle. C'est vrai qu'elle est belle.
Tu as fait de moi ta prisonnière. Mais regarde-moi, regarde la tête que j'ai.
You know, in the end, Truffaut is about a kind of poetic realism, a way of looking at people in a very real and three-dimensional and sympathetic way, but with a very style and a use of cinema which is both sympathetic and also detached. And I think that's what is his strength.
He once said that the entertainment respects a hyperbolic trajectory, which is this way, And he says that life it's the opposite, and this is why we like to entertain ourselves, because life goes this way as we're aging and getting older. And I think I always said that the artist was the man who could work within those two hyperbolic, lines that could respect the line of entertainment and also be true to the line and the descending line of life.
Well, Truffaut was undoubtedly the person who was nearest to the classical cinema. He would have liked to have been thought of as another Renoir.
He liked narrative cinema, and I think cinema today needs to return to this narrative period, you know.
We have a new generation of filmmakers and a new generation of film buffs that regard the past as something conservative. You know, they think the past is not there to teach us anything. They think past belongs to the past. The fact that Truffaut's grave is abandoned or at bay and dusty is not a surprise for me. If younger generation could realize how much fun Truffaut is and how much excitement it is to look at his movies, there'd be a lot of people taking care of his grave right now.
Antoine, vous parlez le télé?
C'est-à-dire j'apprends avec des disques, mais enfin c'est pas très facile.
Les disques, c'est de la blague. Il n'y a pas 36 façons. Il faut apprendre au lit avec une petite amie anglaise. Il serait temps de vous y mettre. Moi, j'ai appris avec une Australienne, pendant que son mari était au travail. Il était peintre en bâtiment.
Comme Hitler.
People who are like in their early 30s would really not consider the New Wave as a landmark. They think it's an intellectual kind of filmmaking that has to do with realism, and that, you know, we have to stand away from that sort of realism and go for the, you know, the special effects films and the genre films. But what they don't realize at all is that the filmmakers they praise, like the Tarantino, the Scorsese, the Coppolas, are children of the New Wave.
Que reste-t-il de nos amours? Que reste-t-il de ces beaux jours? Une photo, vieille photo de ma jeunesse. Que reste-t-il des billets doux, des mois d'avril, des rendez-vous? Un souvenir qui me poursuit sans cesse. Bonheur fané, cheveux au vent, baisers volés, rêve mouvant. Que reste-t-il de tout cela?